Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the 5th of August 2025. Let's get straight into it. We have the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course. You can find them linked in the description below. Typically, we have 810 personnel lost. That's within the range we have come to expect recently. 2 tanks and 2 troop-carrying AFVs are well below the daily average. 50 artillery systems is well above the daily average, and that's fairly usual as well. One multiple launch rocket system and 1 anti-aircraft warfare system as well. So useful for anti-aircraft warfare there. 139 vehicles and fuel tanks. That's well above the 100 number. So that's pretty good in that respect. So we don't have an Andrew Perpetual loss list as far as I am aware, but we do have some Oryx loss lists from yesterday. 35 Russian pieces of kit lost and 37 Ukrainian. That's interesting in and of itself, and we'll look at some of the equipment to try and draw some. In fact, we'll do that first with the Ukrainians. Try and draw some conclusions. So the Ukrainians here losing 37. So already they're losing about the same amount of combat assets. Remember, this isn't counting SUVs, cars, motorcycles, quads, and all that kind of stuff. And the Russians generally lose a lot more of that equipment than the Ukrainians, although that's not always the case, but certainly with ATVs. But here we have a Leopard 2A4. That might be the one we saw the other day on Andrew's list. A T80, 2 T80s, and a T64. So we've got 4 tanks. It's already, showing that Ukrainians are using tanks. We've got BMP Marder, the German infantry fighting vehicle, so a couple of IFVs, and actually YPR 765 is often seen as an IFV. We've got 4 M113s. We've got a Puma 6x6 that looks like an APC, a BTR FV103 Spartan, that's the UK provided one, 5 Max Pros and 2 BAT UMG, so American provided mobility vehicles. You got a Senator, a Husky UK one, Oncilla, Kozak, Novator, 2 Novators, and Command and Staff Vehicle K1 SH1. So that's a lot of mobility equipment, which would suggest the Ukrainians are attacking in certain places. Now, we know that Pokrovsk is pretty hairy at the moment, as in the Russians have been attacking. The Ukrainians appear to be attacking and possibly cutting Russians off there. Might be a successful move for the Ukrainians. We'll have to wait and see what happens this weekend. It's a key time there, but there could be some troops, Russian troops cut off, and also some push up by Kindrativka, I think, in the Sumy area as well. So possibly these stats show us that the Ukrainians are, have the wind behind their sails in some areas of the front line, but in others, of course, the Russians will be pushing hard. We've got some artillery losses there as well, including an AS-90. That's a UK provided one that's destroyed. That is a self-propelled gun. And there you go. So for the Russians, we have just a single T80, a couple of unknown tanks, so 3 tanks in all. And then your AFVs, maybe 6 of those. Oh, no, you got infantry fighting vehicles. So, coming down, you probably got a dozen other sorts of attack vehicles. And then you're down to a few howitzers and transporter, erector, launcher, radar for the S-300. Their S-300 V4. So we saw one of those destroyed yesterday, and then a bunch of trucks. So, that S-300 Telar is worth probably the same as the entire list of Ukrainian equipment lost. We're going to come on to targeted attacks, and I'm going to start with something I couldn't make sense of yesterday, a translation of an LPR statement. Guys, maximum attention. About 300 stormtroopers have effed up from the LNR training ground. So I don't know whether this means with the 300 stormtroopers have been hit in a strike. I can't say anything about the presence of weapons or with IR. Okay, intelligence reconnaissance, no, infrared. But maximum attention, warn everyone as much as possible. They won't necessarily move in a crowd. Also keep that in mind. Don't really know what that means. But this kind of started off a train, as I said earlier, trying to work out what the heck this means. so someone said, I understood that 300 orcs, 300 Russians have deserted from the training ground. So that could be interesting. We've heard some of some surrenders on the front line as well around the Pokrovsk area, which is interesting. So anyway, this started off a train of things that I picked up on, and I spoke about this in my live stream last night with Jonathan Fink, that I think the Ukrainians are turning the screw to some degree with targeted strikes, and they're using their guided glide bombs effectively, and they're using their HIMARS and missiles and drones possibly quite effectively. A whole range of, I think, munitions being used. So we're going to start with guided glide bombs. Operators on the ground filmed the moment Ukrainian aviation struck a Russian base used by assault groups and drone operators with the precision GBU-39 bombs. So remember, this is on the back of. So I'm going to give you a list of what's been going on the last couple of months. So we've had a strike on Koronova that took out the entire command of the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, pretty much. We had 8 FSB officers taken out at once in Belgorod somewhere. We had 17 officers and a single soldier taken out in another strike. We had a number of command nodes and command posts being hit by guided glide bombs and other munitions as well, just over the last few weeks. I've been reporting on this really regularly. We have seen all of those radars and anti-aircraft warfare systems being taken out in Crimea particularly, but not just Crimea, but the Primary unit in Crimea has been wreaking havoc on the Russians there. You've got other radars being hit further back. We're going to talk about that in a bit. Just strategically, things are being hit, of course, railway network, refineries and depots. And then, this is just from yesterday, though. So GBU-39 bombs hit a command or a base, a Russian base used for assault troops and drone operators. You've got MiG-29 striking with an AASM hammer-guided glide bomb on a Russian command post in Oleshki. We've seen a number of bases hit near Oleshki as well recently in the forests there near the Dnipro River, to which you can add this one from yesterday, which was this is nothing particularly massive. This is a Ukrainian strike wiping out an artillery position. One Russian serviceman on comms admitted the gun's gone, everything burned, the dugout's gone, the whole forest too, fire crews came, but it was too late. So although that's just an artillery position, we've seen a number of larger sort of bases that have been taken out in the same area recently. Then yesterday in occupied Seladove, a Russian base you also used for ammunition storage has been destroyed there, and a Russian soldier complaining about that. We have Russian soldiers complaining and asking for help. Everything burned down. Again, literally everything is gone. They were left with nothing but their underwear. Such a tough situation, says War Translated. Just another Russian accumulation point base just completely obliterated. Then we saw, when we've seen yesterday morning, I showed you another S-300 launcher going up like this, but it was a different one. It didn't go up. It went up pretty big time, but not as spectacularly as this. So there's thermal footage of another Russian S-300V long-range surface-to-air missile launcher suffering a rapid high-velocity disassembly, this time in Kherson Oblast. Ukrainian bomber drones successfully snuck over 45 kilometers, that's 28 miles behind the front line, to drop grenades on Russian air defense system there. Now, I was actually heard this from Scruffy Tales on his video synopsis of what's going on at Pokrovsk, because he's saying that things are looking quite good in Pokrovsk. The Ukrainians might be using what he called stealth drones really effectively there. So they are using drones that the Russians can't pick up on their frequencies, and that could be precipitating some success for the Ukrainians. Satellite images then from September the 4th show the aftermath of an attack on a Castor 2 radar in Anapa. I showed you a video of that being struck at night. There was imagery that came out a couple of days ago, or was that yesterday? Because that's September the 4th. So I think that was not last night, it's the night before. Attacked on September the 2nd. Yeah, so it was a couple of days ago. I showed that. Judging by the images, 2 generators that power the radar were damaged, although it doesn't look like the actual radars themselves were hit, but I'm sure they're going to be on the targets going forward. And indeed, JNK picks up on this point. The amount of radar systems Ukraine has been taken out over the past week in both Russia and Russian-occupied Ukraine is quite stunning. It seems preparation for a serious missile campaign. And this is my larger point. These are there's something going on here, and Ukraine is kind of turning the screw on something. I'll come to it in a second. There's a few more things to say. So OSINT Technical saying overnight Ukrainian forces successfully struck a Russian 55ZH 6U Nibu U long-range radar surveillance, long-range air surveillance radar site in Rostov Oblast. So this is into Russia. NASA's firm's data fire monitoring system picked up a major fire at the facility, a key Russian air defense post, on 2 separate passes. Then we have got evidence of more radars being hit, and I presume these are new bits of footage rather than recycled on ones. This time 2 Russian radars in Crimea were hit by drones, the 48YA6K1 Podlet and a Nebo M, another 55ZH6M Nebo M, so similar to the one that was taken out here in Rostov. One presumes that this is it's a slightly different one, not a 6U, it's a 6M. So that is in Crimea. We then hear that footage shows, see this footage has come out this morning. Quite a few people talking about this. Footage shows a Black Sea raid by Ukraine's defense intelligence in August. Using FPV drones and other unmanned systems, special forces destroyed a Russian BL-680 boat, a Harpoon B radar, and a Groza electronic warfare system. They also burned 4 antenna feeder devices and inflicted personnel losses. So you're starting to get targeted strikes by missile, by drone, by teams, by special forces teams. Remember I showed you the boat that was destroyed by a Bayraktar drone. So this is a thing knocked to us saying evidence is mounting showing that the Ukrainian SEAD campaign, the SEAD, that's suppression of enemy air defense. So particularly over Crimea, but also Kherson Oblast as well, and Zaporizhia. And then we can actually expand that into occupied territories further north and then into Russia. The Ukrainians are hitting radar systems big time and air defense systems. And now you've got Bayraktar drones that you haven't seen too much since the beginning of the war, where they were quite prolific in taking out Russian equipment, but then the Russians quickly adapted to being able to take the Bayraktars out, so they moved the Bayraktars back and really only use them for reconnaissance over the Black Sea, where they could do reconnaissance from a great distance and not be taken down. Now you're starting to see them be used again offensively with missiles, which means something's changed, that the air defenses have probably been degraded. So this then leads to this thread. Evidence is mounting showing the Ukrainian SEAD campaign has gathered success. First, Ukrainian Air Force resumed Bayraktar mail strike missions, and this is Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2 are increasingly prowling the northwest Black Sea, says OSINT Technical, likely helped by major losses among Russian air defenses in the area. Seen here, TB2 drops a MAM-L guided bomb, so it's not even a missile, it's a guided bomb on a Russian boat and then just watches it from above. That was landing troops on the Tendra Spit there. Second, says Athene Noctua, strike missions in Crimea are also striking civilian radars, which were also participating in giving Russian AD air defense an air picture while being lower priority targets. But you've seen a whole host of these dome radars being taken out, sometimes with kit inside them, and then here's another radar, like a really substantial kind of civilian type radar that would be used in Russia's overall air defense in acquiring targets. More domes getting hit, radars and surface-to-air missile systems. We've seen Pantsers get destroyed, S-300s, that's another, I think, a Podlet. Here's an S-400, radar for an S-400 getting taken out, so on and so forth. And we've seen Primari with loads of that. So the thread continues. Third, now strike missions are targeting radar installations deeper into Russian territory. Hits have been recorded, but the exact outcome remains to be seen. That's referencing the Nebo U that we were just talking about in Rostov, but there was another one that was hit in Rostov as well at the same time, as well as I can't remember where it was, but there was another radar system hit too. Continued degradation of Russian air defense could be very detrimental for the Russian forces in South Kherson. If properly equipped targeting pods, both F-16s and Mirage 2000 could conduct close air support against Russians in the area. What that means is, if you degraded the Russian radar and air defense systems, of course the air defense systems themselves are contingent upon the radars, then you are able to use planes to come and support Ukrainians on the ground, like close air support, stuff that we haven't really seen much of during the whole of the war. The Russians have done this earlier on in the war, but then started to lose planes, so we haven't really seen too much CAS from planes. But you could start seeing that for the Ukrainians. If you start seeing that, then that's going to make a really big difference. Guided glide bombs can be used more frequently, and then other types of munitions can be used. In this case, more classic Paveway 2, 3 and JDAM would completely turn into shambles, both logistic rear and frontline troops in the Kherson front. In other words, if you can start using JDAMs more freely, because you don't have the air defense, then you start having an effect on troops the other side of the Dnipro River. But the same can be said for Crimea, right? The point of degrading the Russian air defenses on Crimea is that you're going to do something. You're doing that for a reason. And it's got to be to get your planes closer, to also have more effect with your missiles and long-range drones that you're using. So it's a kind of a cumulative effect. It's a snowball effect. You take them out, you have more success. You have more success in taking them, more and more and more and more. And then suddenly Crimea is made untenable for the Russians. On the other hand, we hear that the Russians struck a hospital yesterday with 3 aerial guided glide bombs. There is a really discernible difference between the way the Russians go about using their bombs and missiles, although it's not to say all of the Russian strikes are like this, but they do have a predisposition to strike at civilian targets much more than the Ukrainians. 2 people were sadly killed in a working hospital in Konstantinivka. That's, again, that's a war crime. That's a war crime. Yet again, the Russians have committed another war crime. And here's a really weird bit of footage. So a Ukrainian unit's called the Black Swan. They're operating up in the Sumy area here. They have released footage from one of their own drones of recent Russian strikes with guided bombs and ballistic missiles. So a huge attack here. But in the most bizarre case, 4 ballistic missiles targeted a 3-man reconnaissance team, according to the Ukrainians. So Russia spent $12 million of munitions trying and apparently failing to hit 3 men, according to this Black Swans unit. Now, take it with a pinch of salt. That's coming from the Ukrainians. Can't verify that that's exactly what happened, but it appears to be the case. There's certainly some really significant munitions being used in that area. Now, if we continue to the strike, so like the TLDR of that last section is, I'm slightly upbeat about what the Ukrainians are doing at the moment with regard to the use of their bombs, the guided glide bombs, and their short-range drones, but medium-range drones and long-range drones. There are also rumors from the Russians that the Ukrainians are using their Ram 2X jet. The X-Wing drone that yesterday I showed you going into the front of a Russian truck. Well, there are some claims that they're finding it very difficult to shoot those down as well, that there's some kind of element of the Ram 2X drone that means it's resilient to electronic warfare or something similar. So, as well as general drones that we hear about in the Pokrovsk area. So you've got, drones, short-range drones, medium-range drones, long-range drones. We have 2 more oil facilities hit last night. We have all of these stuff being struck behind the lines in particularly Crimea, but also Kherson, Zaporizhia, even into Rostov. Something is happening here. The Ukrainians are ramping up. I also wonder whether the Ukrainians are trying to stop the Russians from attacking without having, I said this yesterday, I'll just repeat myself, without having to meet the Russians on the battlefield. What you want to do is start taking the Russians out before they commit their troops to the battlefield. So you want to hit those command nodes, decapitate their decision making, and then hit the troop accumulations, so on and so forth. Now, overnight, Russia launched 157 Shaheds, so they are still fairly heavy on our Shahed usage. We've had some really heavy nights the last week or so, so I think they're back up to manufacturing Shaheds at the rate that they were previously building them. So Shaheds, decoy drones, even S-300 missiles. I think there were 6 or 7 S-300s sent, and none of them were shot down. And a KH-59 from Voronezh, so single cruise missile. Ukrainian air defenses shot down and suppressed 121 drones out of 157. So that means 150, so 7 missiles then. And that means there were 6 S-300s and 1 KH-59. all 7 missiles got through, and 35 drones got through in 10 locations. So, having been all upbeat about the Ukrainian situation in that domain, or in a similar domain, the Russians are also getting a lot of long-range drones through at the moment, and they are going to be causing a lot of damage. Dnipropetrovsk was particularly struck last night. I don't know what was hit, but I'm guessing that they probably had a good go at some key infrastructure for the Ukrainians, maybe military infrastructure. So a Russian missile hit an industrial site overnight, while 30 drones attacked the city, 15 of which were shot down. So 15 drones got through in Dnipro alone. Local authorities are warning about possible risk of chemical contamination. So something bad took place in Dnipro. Details have not emerged yet, which usually means they hit something pretty bad in terms of something actually useful. So when you see the Russians targeting and destroying apartment blocks, pictures come out pretty quickly, because it's a kind of PR thing to say, look, Russians are being terrible, look at them taking on civilian targets. When they hit actually sensitive targets, you have a bit of radio silence like this. You have a generic picture and claims of quite a lot of drones and missiles getting through, not knowing what they struck. Now, Russia also tried to pass off... Okay, so going back to this idea that the Russians are doing things very differently to the Ukrainians striking really meaningful targets, and the Russians being far more war crimey, we have this from yesterday. And this was pretty horrific. So Russia tried to pass off an Iskander strike in the Chernihiv region as a hit on a long-range drone unit. So they claimed they hit a long-range drone unit, and this was a long-range drone unit. Loads of white vans, just 8 white vans or more, all parked up together, because that's how drone units like to operate. In reality, the missile actually targeted a humanitarian demining mission. 2 humanitarian deminers were killed. 3 were wounded. I think, are they Danish as well? 2 people were killed, 3 were wounded. No drones, only white civilian vehicles on the footage. So and this was pretty terrible. There's actually footage from the ground as well concerning this strike. It was not cool. And again, the Russians showing their mettle there, showing you what they're made of. Now, not in last night's strikes, but over the night from the 2nd to the 3rd of September, 2 drones violated Polish airspace. So they went into Polish airspace. I think the jets were scrambled, but they didn't do anything, and they just let the drones go about their business, so they didn't shoot them down. I do understand that the risks of shooting down drones over other nations might not be so much about worried about escalation and this and that, but it's shooting drones down over your own territory then means that you've got explosives falling down and possibly landing on houses, farms, towns, whatever. So you could end up doing more damage, and that then upsetting the local population quite a lot. So that they maybe are making a decision that Ukrainians don't have the luxury of making. So those drones are eventually going to go to Ukraine. Usually they might cycle into Polish airspace, but then get back to hit somewhere in western Ukraine. Ukrainians have to shoot these down. Ukraine has, if they're flying to the west, Ukraine has the option of waiting to shoot many of these drones down in more convenient locations, particularly if they're doing it from, say, helicopter and they're just flying alongside it. You can wait till you're over some fields, shoot it down, and hope that it won't do any lasting damage to people below. Whereas you Polish aren't going to be used to that. You're not sure what the infrastructure is around where these drones are. So I'm going to cut the Polish a little bit of slack there, potentially. Right. The Kyiv Independent reports that last night, Ukrainian drones reportedly struck oil facilities in Ryazan Oblast. That's another oil refinery and a depot in Luhansk. So we're going to see some footage of this. Actually, this was confirmed by Robert Brovdy, who's Magyar, commander of the Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces, confirmed the strikes on 2 key fuel sites. The Ryazan refinery, one of Russia's 4 largest, was hit by the 14th Regiment together with the SSO, HUR and other units in occupied Luhansk. Ukrainian drones struck a major fuel depot there. Now, here it is. Atesh partisan movement and an underground Ukrainian network helped to direct the strike on a key fuel depot in Luhansk. The site, now burning, supplied Russia's 41st and 20th Combined Arms Armies. Some are claiming that a Finnish guy helped to alert the Ukrainians to this. So a Finnish Vatnik, Finnish Russian fighter, was claiming that Luhansk armed forces had been using all the fuel locally from local petrol stations to accumulate ahead of a big attack up in Luhansk. But now locals have been refilled themselves and blah, blah, blah. I don't know if that's the case, but it could be another example of saying stuff on social media and then inviting strikes in dangerously. So anyway, this was a fuel depot, although some people like Anton Gerashenko here called it an oil refinery. It's not an oil refinery. You often get this, English not being the first language, this interchangeability of depot and refinery. I was speaking to Will Teal about that, and that frustrates him. An attack and a resulting large fire on reported at an oil depot in Russian-occupied Luhansk. So you can see some really significant flames going off there. Then we go to Ryazan. Photos from Ryazan, where Ukraine's drones have arranged a little night show for the locals. Refinery is well alight again, just over a month since the last time it was struck. So this has been struck a number of times, Ryazan. And you can see that there was definitely some successful strikes taking place there, or at least a successful strike. Ryazan oil refinery, with total oil refining capacity of up to 17 million tons annually, was attacked tonight. Previously, it was also targeted on the 2nd of August. So they are returning to these facilities, stopping them from fixing them and getting them back on their feet. Something that we're seeing more recently compared to earlier in the war. And now an analysis from Exxon Nova from that Ryazan oil refinery shows a strike likely hit an ELOU AVT6 unit, an electric desalting and atmospheric vacuum distillation installation, for those who care. Officially, it handles 6 million tons of oil per year, but many of these older units were modernized to boost capacity by 2 to 2.5 times. That's just in those areas, I presume, rather than the refinery as a whole. But that looks like it is in a spot of bother. And then we hear that also something in Yelets in Lipetsk region was hit, likely the Energia plant, and not for the first time. It's been targeted again. I think this is like the 4th time it's been targeted. It's known for producing batteries for drones and power units for aviation and naval systems. If that's connected to the Shahed drone manufacturing, it's part of the supply chain, then that's obviously going to be super useful. Just generally, that's going to be useful for the Ukrainians. Then this interesting bit of footage came out of, it's an underwater video from a diver in the Black Sea, surfaced online, showing a diver finding the wreckage of a downed Storm Shadow cruise missile somewhere off the Black Sea coast, and quite a lot of other equipment by the looks of it. I don't think that's all Storm Shadow. I could be wrong though. But anyway, shows that the Russians might well have had success with downing Storm Shadow missiles previously. Okay, now we're going to move on to God, I like a bit of diving footage. I learned to dive in Fiji when I was backpacking in 2000. Good times, nice warm sea. Wouldn't do that in the UK, that's for sure. Okay, moving on to other bits and pieces. And I'm going to split much of what I was going to say off into a separate video, because it's the TLDR of the peacekeeping stuff is that Trump has gone nuts again, pretty much, in saying that Europe has to do it all. And then he's posting nice pictures of him and Putin again. Anyway, we'll start with the Russian economy. Russia's Minister of Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, admitted that the Russian economy has reached a point where it will no longer grow. According to Reshetnikov, the baseline growth forecast will be revised further downwards. Stagnation is setting in much earlier than it expected. We have a bona fide nationwide bank run, apparently, on money is now setting up in Russia, according to Stratcom Center, as depositors pull out funds at near record levels. So we got 2024 in the orange, 2025 in the red. You had a big pull on them at the end of the year last year, but you've got much lower at the moment. Change in cash in circulation outside the Bank of Russia, a billion of rubles. So people are extracting money quite rapidly. That, as you can see, this precipitous drop, that has been something I've almost reported on a number of times. Prune 60 often writes things on this, but I don't think I've done that so far, but I just thought I would today to let you know. Putin has also come out and admitted that Russia faces a gas shortage amid Ukraine's strikes on energy infrastructure, so that's significant. But he suggested switching to coal reserves, which is fascinating because the coal industry is admittedly in a hell of a bind at the moment in Russia. I think in all sorts of trouble. So that could be an interesting strategic shift there to get them out of a bit of a hole with regard to gas shortages. So he says the switching to coal reserves, which will last for almost 1,000 years, could be a way forward for the Russians there. We also hear that hidden unemployment has been growing in Russia since the second half of the second quarter. The state of the economy is deteriorating sharply. This is Evgen Istribin again. Explanation: I took the consolidated budget data, subtracted the federal budget figures to clear the noise on some taxes and see more or less clean dynamics since some taxes changed their rates from the new year and innovations were introduced in taxation. I will not overload you with unnecessary information, so let's get to the point. Income tax went into the minus year on year. April minus 7%, May minus 17%, June minus 21%. Russian enterprises began to receive less profit. Tax deductions to the budget fell. In such a situation, enterprises moved to optimization. They reduced all expenses, including the wage fund. So this is why you've seen big organizations go down to 4-day working weeks. This is evident from the dynamics of deductions of the following taxes. Insurance contributions for compulsory social insurance, April plus 18% year on year, May minus 1%, June plus 1%. In May, June, deductions fell below the level of the previous year. Personal income tax plus 20% April, plus 18% May, minus 4% in June. In June, the payment of personal income tax fell by 4%. These last two taxes show the true situation on the labour market in Russia. All these figures that Rosstat gives about unemployment and the rate of wage growth are a lie. In reality, in the second half of the second quarter, they began to cut the wage fund. There are many ways to hide unemployment. Reducing the length of the working week, transition to a 4-day week, we've seen that loads. Reducing the length of the working day by several hours. Unpaid leave. So we know that, I think, different organisations have forced unpaid leave. I think the railway network have done that. I could be wrong though. All these methods are to hide the sharp deterioration in the labour market. So obviously, if you don't need people working as much, you're gonna because you're not getting paid for whatever it is you provide, you're going to cut the wage bill. That's almost always the biggest cost for any large organisation. So you're going to cut those costs. And that's going to be all the things above. So reduce the working day, reduce the working week, unpaid leave. You're just going to go on holiday and we ain't going to pay you. In reality, the entire civil economy has begun to collapse. Workers are not being fired, but they are sitting idle. The most important thing is that the wage fund has begun to fall. The growth of hidden unemployment is a very dangerous economic process that covers everything like a tsunami. Note that these problems are already noticeable in the fall in tax revenues since May to June, and this all happened before we learned that there are a lot of factories officially switched to a full-day working week at the end of summer. And this means that we can make a cautious assumption that the situation will be even worse in the coming months, and that's great. Source all the data from the Ministry of Finance of Russia, so this is coming from Russian data itself, and they will be fixing that data to look as positive as possible, one would assume, if they're going to fix it at all. And so, it's as bad as this might sound, it's likely to be even worse. Now, a US official said to CNN last night that Trump emphasized that Europe must stop purchasing Russian oil. That is funding the war, as Russia received 1.1 billion euros in fuel sales from the EU in 1 year. I explained this last night, and the idea is that actually this is mainly Hungary and Slovakia, and so if he's having a go at Europe, he needs to have a go at his best mates. And I was wondering whether he heard about these numbers, had a go at Europe, and then was told by Europe, actually, that's Hungary. So there was a phone call that took place yesterday after the coalition of the willing meeting between 30 to 40 member states, or coalition states. in France, some were meeting remotely. And then there was this phone call between European leaders and Trump, I think also Zelensky and Trump, maybe separately. And apparently it got heated. And it got heated with Trump. And Trump has basically said to Europe, stop buying stuff off Russia, to which Europe said, you do realize that's Hungary and Slovakia, and maybe that's why it got heated. And then they're wanting, and also Zelensky is wanting the US to put sanctions on Russia, and now Trump has turned around and said, you guys need to do this yourself, basically, and you guys need to sanction China, whereas he's not really sanctioned China in the way he's sanctioned India. So he sanctioned India supposedly for buying Russian hydrocarbons, although he hasn't sanctioned these nations that buy more Russian hydrocarbons. So you know it's nothing to do with Russia, and it's more to do with, in India's case, with him getting the slight that Modi was angry at being asked to nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. So there's loads going on here, and it's not looking good for the US support for Ukraine going forward. European Commission wants to permanently ban, what is coming out of this, wants to permanently ban from buying Russian energy resources so that not a single molecule of Russian hydrocarbons enters the European Union. That comes from the European Commission for Energy, Dan Jorgensen, which is great, but that's going to be down to Slovakia and Hungary, and maybe it's up to Ukraine to put those sanctions on by bombing the crap out of the Druzhba pipeline. And then at the same time, we're now hearing from Russian media, take this with a pinch of salt, because Russia was struggling to get chicken eggs, remember? We're having to get them in from, if I remember correctly, Turkey and possibly Iran. So the US has begun importing chicken eggs from Russia for the first time in 33 years. In July, the US received $455,000 worth of Russian eggs, the first such shipment since 1992. Now, if that's true, the US is turning around saying you can't buy oil off Russia, and then the US is buying eggs off Russia because things are desperate. Eggs have been going up in price and they're trying to get hold of it due to bird flu and blah, blah, blah. Now, Russia has come out and said that the international peacekeepers in Ukraine, if there are international peacekeepers for security guarantees, they would be recognized, quote, as a threat. Quote, can Ukraine's security guarantees be ensured and provided by foreign, especially European and American military contingents? Definitely not. They cannot, said Dmitry Peskov. So this is Russia saying there can't be security guarantees, essentially, which is to say we're not going to have a peace deal. At the same time, Russia is massively building up on their borders with the Nordic states. Daniela here from Tochny shows two images, one of a massive forest area and another of that area being completely knocked down and turned into some kind of military facility. At this point, he said, I am becoming a broken disc, a broken record, but this is not a country which is preparing for peace. Russia is not interested. So Peskov's just told you they don't want peace, or you can't have security guarantees. And then they're building up here. So this is a country preparing for war with us. So he is from Norway. At this pace, they will not need 5 or 10 years. They will just need 1 year of work, thanks to another source for working on this. So Perm and Iskra plants, two plants, are places where weapons to kill more Europeans are made right now, while you sleep and while you order your latte at the bar. The place produces different types of missiles, and this is just after 1 year. So these have just been built, he's saying. Daniela also says, where in June 2024 there was a forest, in July 2025 we have filing stations and logistics hubs to fill and ship shells, rockets and other ordnance. Then we come on to this. From dirt to nearly completed explosive production plants in 1 year. When the West will understand this is becoming when will the West understand that this is becoming an existential confrontation for all of us? Russia must be defeated and disarmed. Without disarmament, there will be no safety or peace. So you've got the US then saying, well, it's up to you, Europe. Trump clearly getting frustrated that there's no movement. He can't get the two leaders to meet. You can't get the two leaders to meet because Putin is saying they can only meet in Moscow. And Zelensky saying, I'm not going to meet in Moscow. But that's what Putin said. Yeah, I'll meet him if he comes to Moscow. That's never going to happen. That's way too unsafe. To which Putin says, it will make it safe for you, no problem. So the US should be getting really pissed off with Russia, but they don't seem to be. Although it's difficult to know. So Putin claimed no one has spoken to Russia seriously about security guarantees, warning that all foreign troops in Ukraine will be treated as legitimate targets. He also said Moscow would be the best place for meeting Zelensky. CNN has reported. So then after all of this, Trump then releases on Truth Social a nice picture of him and Putin looking up into the air at the flyover. And you've got him saying he has a lovely relationship with Putin, Xi Jinping, and Kim Jong-un. He's saying that again, and he said that again yesterday. 3 weeks after the Alaska summit, CNN reports that the developments reflect the intractability of the war in Ukraine. So 3 weeks after the Alaska summit, Trump is growing frustrated with the lack of progress in the peace process and is weighing how involved he should be in arranging a meeting between Putin and Zelensky. In other words, he's looking for an off-ramp. He's looking for an excuse to get out of this and not put sanctions on Russia. There is no progress because you haven't put sanctions on Russia. Now, UK's Keir Starmer announced yesterday that the coalition are willing that they are going to supply Ukraine with long-range missiles capable of striking deep into Russia. So the shift becomes when partners acknowledge Putin cannot be trusted and pressure must increase to end the war. This is great. So the UK are going to produce these new Nightfall missiles, and they're going to provide these to Ukraine. I don't know what the time frame on that is, but what I'm doing here is juxtaposing Europe, who are standing with Ukraine and saying, we're going to give you more weapons. We're going to put the 19th sanctions package on. UK are going to put more sanctions on. Japan are going to put more sanctions on Russia. Meanwhile, the US goes, Trump literally said yesterday, it's up to you guys to put sanctions on, not us. You should put sanctions on China and stop buying so much fuel. Well, actually, how about you have a go at Slovakia and Hungary for doing that? And you need to put sanctions on because you've been threatening this for 7 months and you've done the square root of naff all. So when asked whether the US is putting enough pressure on Moscow, Zelensky stressed, so he's asked that question directly and he gives you the answer. And this is the answer. This is the opinion we should all have. If you're still a fan of Trump in this war, in supporting Ukraine, you need to get your heads checked. Zelensky is telling you firsthand, it is not enough. And President Trump knows my opinion. If Putin again delays any peace talks, we really count on strong US pressure on Russia. There are not only tariffs and sanctions, but also large arms packages for Ukraine, he stressed. The president believes that a whole range of pressure measures is needed. Yeah, but he's not doing it. It's not enough. Zelensky's telling you personally, it is not enough. What Trump is doing is not enough. And that's where we are. And that gives then Putin permission to say, ain't going to have security guarantees. And the only meeting we're going to have is me and Zelensky in the Kremlin. Anyway, that's enough from me. Please remember to check out Car for Ukraine. It will be linked in the description below, hopefully. That's our fabulous campaign fundraiser with Car for Ukraine, obviously. It's the Autumn Harvest one with lots of other YouTubers and influencers. We are almost up to 3,000 of our 22,000. So thank you so much for all these incredibly kind people. As I said last night, I think on the live stream, thank you so much to David Segelman, or I said that yesterday, for some really generous contributions, and also David Lewis yesterday, and all the kind people. Thank you so much. David Lewis, legend. All the Davids, legends. Thank you very much. Take care. Speak to you soon.